You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Hello everyone, welcome back to episode 219 of Arsenal Pass. Hayden here with Pankaj, Bhojwani. As always, this week on the pod, we made some calls on the upcoming Nationals meta last week and the week before actually, and this week we get to see how right or maybe wrong we were and where the meta goes in week 2. And of course, as we head to Pro Tour Singapore, who are the winners this past weekend? Who are the losers? The sleeper picks, and what does it all tell us about high seas and classic constructed? Plus, are there some decks that we're not talking about that we should be talking about for these next couple of weeks of Nationals? Is there maybe one of those, as we say, sleeper picks that might be worth picking up and doing a bit of testing as we head into these final weeks of the national season? Or I guess week 2, week 3, week 4. Anyway, Pankaj, before we get into all that, how was your week in Flesh and Blood?
Well, you brought up sleeper picks, Hayden, and it turns out last week on the pod when I said I was last week when I said I was done with my Marlin Cope, turns out I was lying because I'm back on the Marlin boat and I'm just tuning. I don't know what draws me so much towards this deck because someone pointed out that it's basically Bravo. And I was like, damn, you are so right. It basically is Bravo, except you do get Codex, which is strong, and you get 3 of a Kind, which is also strong. Those are the cards that make you like not Bravo. And I guess Conqueror of the High Seas, which is just Bravo wishes he could have Conqueror of the High Seas, but he doesn't because he's not Pirate. Pirate Bravo win, I guess. But yeah, that's been my week. I'm just brewing Marlin again. It kind of reminds me of, you know how when Nu first came out, there was this meme that Nu sucks.
Was it?
Because you just draw these hands as Nu. And yeah, there was. Like, you just draw these hands as Nu, and like, why am I playing this deck? It's like 3 blues, and like, they don't do, you deal like 2 damage with them or something. I'm getting that vibe from Marlin. But, you know, we'll see if I can cook further with it. Other than that, I basically was tuned into Canadian Nats coverage this past weekend, and wanted to shout out Ellie Bird and Frank Hung for an amazing job casting. I mean, also, the fact that casting 2 full days and just 2 of them, like no rotation between casters and stuff, is just, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of effort, and I think they did an excellent job.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I did check out a bit of coverage over the weekend. German Nationals as well over the weekend was streamed. I was really disappointed that Taiwanese Nationals wasn't on stream. Yeah, because OO took that out. I think maybe, you know, one of the best players in Asia, who is a calling winner at this point as well. You know, now Taiwanese national champion. I think more to come from OO, but that country in particular, I haven't been there twice. Now for events, love the place, love the players. I think there's some fantastic players there. Peitang Liao as well, also out of Taiwan. Just a host of names. So yeah, really disappointed they didn't stream that, unfortunately, or couldn't find a way to stream it. But German Nationals, Canadian Nationals over the weekend, and I actually think another event was streamed as well, but I didn't tune in. What was streamed? I feel like there was a third stream over the weekend. I'm having a look here now. Oh, I think oh no, that's this coming weekend. I feel like there was
I saw Canada and Germany. I saw Canada and Germany as well. I didn't see a third, and I feel like YouTube should have recommended it to me if there was a third.
Yeah. What I just realized is they've already updated the Nationals page for this week of Nationals, so you can't see what the streams were from last week. But this coming weekend though, definitely worth shouting out because don't have much to talk about in the news. But this coming weekend we do have Singapore, which is huge from national champion standpoint, and the United Kingdom. So 2 really big national championships, both being streamed this coming weekend. Also elsewhere, Brazilian national champions, Brazil national championships this weekend as well. I think, you know, obviously
is that being streamed?
That one's not being streamed. But a rising... No. Well, at least there's not a stream currently listed on the National Championships page. But I think obviously a rising nation within Flesh and Blood. Obviously seeing a lot of fantastic players come out of that area and do really well on the world stage. Pro Tour top 8s, calling wins, etc. France is this coming weekend as well. It doesn't look like France has a stream link, but I usually think they stream French Nationals. Either...
I have a video, right?
Yeah, the French...
Roman. Yeah.
Yeah,
usually
content creators. So I don't know. The Netherlands is on this coming weekend. New Zealand as well. There's a lot of really big ones on this coming weekend. It doesn't seem like a lot of these are being streamed, or at least there isn't links on the National Championship page at this point. But keep an eye on that, because there could be stream links to come to be updated. I really hope that some of these other ones are, being streamed, because selfishly, I'd love to see New Zealand Nationals, because I have friends playing New Zealand Nationals this weekend, players that I've helped prep with as well. So yeah, we'll see. But Indonesia does have a live stream, it turns out. So if you want to check out Indonesia as well, alongside Singapore and United Kingdom, you can definitely do so. But yeah, very excited to see what week 2 will bring us, and I guess we're going to talk more about it this week.
Yeah, awesome season for content and all these great Nationals games. I can't wait to tune in. Did you mention what you've been up to in terms of playing?
I've been testing. So for me, Singapore, I was just saying in the pre-show, Singapore is now 3 weeks away, or 3 weeks until I leave to go to Singapore for PT. And I'm feeling a little bit unprepared. I've been mostly, because of national season, although I'm not playing, everyone in my testing group, or that I sort of test with or associate with, has been preparing for nationals. So the focus has definitely been on nationals, right? A lot of the group that I test with are Canadian, so they're and from the US, so they're now in the rearview mirror. They're now focused on PT, so I can kind of align with them, which is great. And then some of the New Zealanders this coming weekend. Australians, not for another weekend, interestingly. They've got another week to wait. But yeah, I'm definitely trying to work out what I want to play, trying to hopefully lock in soon. I've been doing sort of the bit of the testing dummy role over the past sort of week or so. I'm playing a lot of different decks, trying to get to grips with... Well, I guess I've had the ability to get to grips with some of the other decks in the format that I might not even have my eye on, but at least I can understand more of. So that's been helpful, I think, especially as this format sort of, I think, will rapidly evolve, and there's a few decks on the fringe, or heroes on the fringe, that I think will have some impact, and having the ability to get some games in with them, I think, has been important. But yeah, otherwise, I'm not playing nationals in 2 weeks. I'm training a lot for an event that I'm running that weekend instead. So yeah, that's kind of been my week, really.
When are you trying to lock in your CC deck by?
I would love to this weekend. Like, I would love to do that this weekend and have 2.5 weeks to just like grind it out.
That's a really fast turnaround. So I just have 5 days to get you on Marlin. All right, cool.
I was just thinking about Marlin.
The clock starts. I need to try it. Yes.
Yeah, I was just thinking about Marlin.
I mean, you did mention fringe decks, so there you go.
Yeah, not that fringe. I mean, like on the forehead, not like so far of the fringe that it's at the floor. You know what I mean? Also, I was thinking while you were talking about Marlin, I was like, I really wish that you would walk the plank with this Marlin propaganda, honestly. I was thinking about that, you know. I don't know. I mean, I would be down
I guess.
I'd be down to play Marlin. Come on, I'd be down to play it, but I just don't think it's good. I like Puffin, unfortunately. This is the Gravy Bone set.
It is the Gravy Bone set. It's funny how many of the pirate cards might as well just say Necromancer on them. We've seen this happen with Illusionist too, like how Vestige of Soul is a light card, but might as well just say Illusionist on it. Same with Library of Solana, same with Light of Soul, same with Flamescale Furnace. I guess if I put Flamescale Furnace in the deck to, like, I don't know, for like a random Bravo, I guess use one more armor, but it was basically a draw my card. Same with Tome of Imperial Flame. It happens a lot. And in this case, it's like the entire pirate class. Most of it might as well just say Necromancer on it, or like Gravy Bone specialization, I don't know. Because man, those cards are not the same in the other heroes.
Not yet.
But anyway, that's for the main topic of the pod.
So speaking of news this week, not much to cover really. We're recording early. That's the news, I guess, this week, because I'm traveling for work this week. So Pankaj has obliged me to, be a nice guy and record early this week. But it means we're kind of only a couple of days between when we recorded the last pod and this pod. So not a lot. Not a lot to necessarily cover in the news. But as I say, a bunch of nationals wins this week. Congratulations to all our new national champions in different parts around the world. And of course, more to crown this coming weekend. Check out those streams. And hopefully we do get a couple of additional streams. But there's going to be, a lot of big nationals over the next few weeks as we head towards Singapore.
Cool. On to the Command and Cookout then. This week's question comes from Shadow Kaiser, which kind of sounds like an evil version of Kaiser from from Hong Kong, from Blue Pitch. I had given a question as a handwritten note at PT London, basically asking for your thoughts on a redesign of randomness to the Brute class cards, especially on the common and rare card level to give a foundational boost to the class. My own thoughts were to have randomness be an additional choice to gamble and hit big, rather than it being a mandatory hurdle. But those are just my thoughts. I'm very interested in yours. So to sum up the question is, how should LSS be designing commons and rares for Rhino/Brute in the future?
Yeah,
I'm sure you have thoughts and opinions on this, Hayden.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I do have a view, which I'll share. I think, first of all, just shout out to Shadow Kaiser, who came up to me at Pro Tour London, shared this question, and I took a photo of the question, and then I had forgotten that I taken a photo of the question, and they prompted us on YouTube. So thank you for your comment, and I wanted to definitely get this question on there. I think we also took a photo together as well, so shout out. Great photo. I think I was doing an impersonation of something, a club maybe, I don't know. I think what I would say is, the difference between, first of all, I would start with the difference between, say, Rhinar and KO, I think. And I think when you play KO, just from a standpoint of, you have this value engine added to KO, right? With making these might tokens. So you go along the sort of like trail of, the quest of drawing and discarding, or discarding cards and getting the effect of your KO ability. I think having a value engine attached to that kind of potential randomness is quite interesting, and I think it plays out a lot nicer, I think I will say, because Intimidate is not a nice mechanic, which we can kind of get to. So I think what I quite like is how they arrived at the design of KO. I think KO is a very interesting hero in terms of design. I think it's a little bit limited to an extent in terms that it is really that kind of value hero, and a lot of those cards that enable the hero don't defend, so it's a little bit one-dimensional in some ways. But what I do like about KO is that I think it can play a lot of different speeds. You can play very aggressively, you can play quite risk adverse and only set up hands where you guarantee that you're gonna hit off your discard, or you can be like, nope, you know what, I'm gonna play these 3-card hands, I'm just gonna draw off the top and try and hit with my Wild Ride, and if I don't, because I'm playing 6 attacks or 6 cards that don't have 6 attack, then, or 5 or more because of KO's ability, obviously, then I miss out. So I think the KO design and how they've lent into cards for particularly KO, I think, was quite interesting in heavy hitters and prior to heavy hitters as well. When it comes to the idea of just pure randomness with Brute, I don't mind the additional choice to gamble. I think for me, so obviously they printed Beat Chest. I think Beat Chest was kind of a whiff for me. I don't think that really is... I think it's, in theory, interesting, but I think the problem they have with that design space is that because of how it ties with Rhinar to Intimidate, they have to be very careful about how powerful Beat Chest is, and so they didn't particularly print any powerful Beat Chest cards, right? And I don't know if they can while Rhinar still exists, and also Rhinar is so far away from Living Legend. But I like that idea of potentially being able to get an effect off a discard, being able to choose the discard with Beat Chest. Or you could do something like Shadow Kaiser's saying, add an additional potential random. So maybe you say something like, okay, it's akin to Beat Chest, you discard a specific card, you get an effect. Or you discard a random card and you get an upgraded effect. And I think that could be quite an interesting way to take Brutes in the future. But I just think there's a lot of design limitations that particularly Rhinar places on. But also just having the Intimidate mechanic exist in the game kind of places on things. So I think we're going to see them go down more of the KO route. I think, to Shadow Kaiser's point, an ability that can kind of choose to gamble or self-gamble, I think could be a route to go. I would love to see Beat Chest sort of be revamped. And it's almost like, they had Dominate and then they came back with Overpower. I'd love them to have like Beat Chest and they come back with a better version of Beat Chest that's a bit more, I don't know, just a bit more interesting, has a bit more play to it, is a bit more robust in terms of mechanic, and has some avenues to actually be in the competitive space.
I love that you brought up Beat Chest, because I have a bit of a problem with those cards. And I'm going to be clear here. I'm going to... Well, so the reason they suck is that it conflicts with everything else the deck is trying to do, because all the Beat Chest cards are non-attacks and they don't have attack values. I'm going to...
That's not true. That's not true. That's not true.
Was there an attack that was Beat Chest?
Mini. So there's the 2-for-6
Oh,
that...
Oh my god, yeah. Sorry, I'm just thinking of the pump. For some reason, I'm thinking, because that was like the most playable, like in draft at least. I was like, kind of like the best one. Okay, I'm also going to contextualize this. I'm going to talk more brute in general because I do think Rhina's ability is just kind of problematic. And I don't really want to like go touch into that.
That's fair.
I think the problem I have with the brute stuff is that the power cards are so anti-synergistic with the rest of the deck because the power cards are all basically non-attacks that there's only so much. There's only so much like deck building choice you have that you're very, very restricted. I do wonder what could happen if they design cards that have a benefit when you play it, but also if they are discarded. Because so far we've only seen one on the, or like either end, right? Like Beast Within, for example, playing it is garbage, but when you discard it, it's awesome. And then there's like the Skull Crack and cards like that, right? Where it's like you discard it and it's like cool, but when you play it, it does nothing. And I do wonder whether there is some sort of card they could create that actually has benefit on either side. I think like Massacre is one that kind of comes to mind. Like I do like Design Massacre where you've played it and you've intimidated this turn, it does something, but if you discard it, it also does something. And if lean more into that side, probably like not Intimidate specifically, obviously, but in that realm. Although that is maybe straying from the question a little bit because I don't think that would be a common or a rare. That does feel like a Majestic level thing. But I do wonder whether that can alleviate. For me, one of the Brute's biggest problems is that you can play a Wild Ride and then it's really bad with your Blood Rushes and your Carsbones that are in the deck.
Yeah. I think the problem is just that a lot of the commons in the rares just don't have synergy. They're cards on their own. And that is a very big problem with Brute is that outside of a couple of the Majestics, particularly Blood Rush Bellows, right? Like the cards don't work in tandem with each other. I think some of the draw discard is more interesting because it does have some amount of synergy, and that's why I say KO really drives that synergy, right? Like Wild Ride on its own, you're like, okay, it has an effect that could create synergy. KO gives you a way to create the synergy, right? Obviously, Beast Within, things like that as well. But they're very few and far between in Brute. Like, let's take away Blood Rush Bellows, and you don't have a lot of power cards in Brute. Your power cards are value. You know, like Swing Big is massive value. It's a 2-cost 8 attack. But again, it's value, right? It's not a particularly synergistic card in of itself as well. So I messed around with the deck for PTLA last year, and I was really keen to try and make it work. And I've revisited a couple of times, and part of me wishes I kind of just played it because I didn't love the fact that I chose Dromai for that event because I didn't think that... I thought it was the best deck, but I wasn't particularly happy with how I was playing with it in the format at the time. I didn't feel like I was across the matchups in the way I wanted to be. I don't know, something just wasn't clicking for me. And I had this deck, which was this club Rhino deck that used agility tokens to, so you're playing like Take It on the Chin, you're playing like Clash of Agility, and you're playing club, and you're playing Savage Feast, and you're trying to, like gain value, like do these like actual synergistic value plays in these big sort of turns with your agility tokens, and it was fun, but I think ultimately it was just because it wasn't quite good enough, and I would love to be able to re-explore that in the future.
One other aspect of Brute, you brought up the draw discard stuff, and that reminded me of one other aspect of Brute that I think perhaps could have a little bit of polishing, is that when you are built around like your Wild Rides and your Pulpings and stuff, you don't actually know the resources that you have on your turn. And so, actually, speaking of a common or rare the design I do actually like is Run Roughshod.
Yes.
I do like that is a strong blue, so it can like fuel your turn, but also if you are caught with it and you fulfill the quest, you do get an overrate, like sort of blue card where if you're flush with resources, this is like a blue you can play, but if you can also randomly draw into it and it fuels the rest of your turn. I think but basically what I'm getting at is that the aspect of just not knowing how many resources you have on your turn because you're going to be drawing and discarding randomly is another thing that could potentially be alleviated with cards like Run Roughshod.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, imagine if they printed that in other colors. Yellow. Yeah. No, it's a great question. Look, I mean, shout out to... we didn't even touch on Leviah, right, when it comes to Brute, but I think Shadow Brute is just a whole different thing altogether, honestly. Like, I just wanted to also, specifically talk about Brute, I think, because the Shadow is what gives a lot of the identity to Leviah rather than the Brute, to be honest.
We kind of are mostly talking about KO because we don't... Like, going near Intimidate is just it's a whole can of worms, and then Leviah is Shadow Brute. So we're kind of mostly talking about KO, but...
Yeah.
I think it does apply to future Brutes that could potentially be created.
I agree. Cool. Well, thank you for the question, Shadow Kaiser. Thanks for coming up and saying a big hello at PT London. It was nice to meet you and to chat a little bit. And yeah, great question. Thank you again for reminding us. If you want to get your questions in for the Command Cookout section, you can definitely do so. We definitely have space for your questions. We're on the lookout for some more great questions. You can either drop them in the YouTube comments below. You can drop a note or a comment on Spotify if you're a Spotify listener. You can, if you are an Arsenal Pass patron, drop it in the Patreon Discord. You can email us at arsenalpassfab@gmail.com, or in the coming weeks where you see us at multiple events, whether that's Singapore, Auckland, whatever the next calling is that Pankaj will be at, drop us a note and let us know what your question is. With that said, let's get into the main topic of the pod. Nationals metagame, predicting meta shifts, and having a look at the week 1 results and seeing how well we did when it came to understanding this week 1 of the metagame, Pankaj. And I want to start with a bit of just an overview of what week 1 of Nationals looked like. We had 11 national championships during week 1 of this 2025 national season, including Canada, Germany, Thailand, and Denmark as some of the bigger nationals occurring this past weekend. Winners. I want to talk winners first, and then what I would like to do is get into a bit of a breakdown of some of these bigger events. Now, I'm not saying that some of these smaller nationals don't mean as much. Of course, they definitely do. Shout out to all those national champions. What I like about some of these bigger events is, first of all, we had a bit of coverage on them, so we can understand some of the context a little bit more, but also they are a larger sample size to talk about the metagame breakdown and the top 8 breakdown as opposed to some of these smaller events. But again, shout out to all our new national champions. Look forward to seeing you at Worlds this year. Let's talk winners of our 11 nationals. First of all, got to start with the headline. 4 Cindras, a big weekend for Cindra this past weekend, winning over a third of the nationals that occurred, including Canada, Denmark, Switzerland, and Thailand. And then the other 7 nationals, 7 different heroes winning them, which is kind of crazy, honestly, I think. Dash.io winning in Brunei, Prism in Czechia, Slippy in Germany, Azalea in Iceland, Arachne Marinette in Romania, Gravy Bones in Slovenia, and Verdance in Taiwan. And we'll get into how that kind of occurred through some of these events. But first of all, Pankaj, just want to get your thoughts, initial reactions on the week 1 sort of winners metagame.
So a week or two ago, when we were talking about Cindra being the second most represented at US Nationals, I brought up that maybe they were kind of just ahead of the metagame. Like those players were just ahead of the metagame,
Sure.
Where they were expecting Gravies to be more tuned and more strong and just more represented, probably even because at US Nats, Gravy was like 4th or 5th most represented. And I was talking maybe those Cindras are just ahead of the metagame, and then here we are a couple of weeks later, and Cindra is absolutely like performing extremely well and in a sense farming the Gravies, where now the Gravies are being like a lot of these national championships, like Gravies is very, very highly represented. If you look at Canada, for example, Gravy was the most represented, so we're seeing Cindra finally come out. As we get on and talk more, though, we'll talk about how this may potentially shift. But yeah, that's a main thing I want to talk about, where the US national Cindras, like the people who brought Cindra to the event, I hope they feel a little bit validated, because it did seem, I think the main reason they brought that was to try and combat the Gravies. So here we are, and it does seem like the pick, at least for now, but maybe they were just a little too early. I mean, do you have any high-level thoughts?
Yeah, so Cindra was the second most played at US Nats, right? And then the 5th most played at Bologna. I hope they don't feel validated, because I don't think it was a good pick for US Nationals. I think I was really clear. I think I've been very outspoken on my thoughts on Cindra.
You've hated Cindra for like a while. You're like, man, this deck is garbage.
But what did I say last week? Because I want to make sure the record is correct here in terms of, I said last week that now is the time to go to Cindra. This is the time to play Cindra. I didn't think earlier was. I think Earth was too highly represented. I think people were too high on Azalea coming into the previous weekends. Nu was around as well. I think even like Prism is not a particularly amazing matchup, right? So I did not think it was Cindra's time, and I was not surprised to see the conversion of Cindra at US Nationals. Coming into Bologna, it was of course the fifth most played deck. It was kind of in that second echelon of heroes being played in Bologna. Again, I didn't think it was particularly the time for Cindra. Azalea and Earth still on the rise. I think what we said last weekend though is that Cindra has been, it seems like Azalea has been the go-to aggressive deck for players, and then Cindra has been that second. And we always know that people want to play aggro. Like aggro is the most popular archetype in any given format of Flesh and Blood that we've ever had, right? People are always looking for what the aggro deck is. It seems like that has been established as Azalea, Cindra, and I would say Slippy is maybe the one that's kind of sitting on the the edges. We'll talk more about Slippy soon. And I think what was happening is that Earth was really dropping away because of the rise of Gravy Bones and even the rise of Cindra into, I would say, Verdance. People were even playing Verdance less, I think, as well. But overall, Gravy's matchup into the Earth Heroes was pulling Earth back. And I think we identified last weekend, like this is the weekend where it's the right time to attack Gravy Bones. It's the right time to try and attack Prism, for instance. I think we said kind of last week, we thought the clear 4 best, or the 4 decks that were going to be defining the format this weekend were Cindra, Gravy Bones, Verdance, and Prism. And I think that's kind of how it eventuated, really.
Mm-hmm. I want to tangent a little bit, because you brought something up, which I feel like is something they used to also kind of just take for granted. But if I think about the past few months, I'm not entirely sure it's true anymore, which is that aggro is the most popular archetype. Like, yeah, I'm not entirely sure if that's true in Flesh and Blood. If you think about how the past few months have shaken out, ever since the loss of Aurora, I guess, which was, in a sense, she was aggro, but she was also kind of just clearly the best deck, so everyone, like, played her. But past that, like, if you think, like, we had Florian that was most represented at US Nationals. Like, at Canada, for example, it was Gravy Bones. I think at Bologna it was Florian as well. Yeah, Florian was up there, tied. I do feel like in Flesh and Blood, maybe that... Yeah, in Flesh and Blood, I wonder whether that paradigm of aggro is the most popular. Like, maybe that doesn't quite hold. Maybe people just gravitate to actually just playing, like, the best deck, and then people just play that.
I think it does. I think it does. I'll explain this a bit clearer, but I think it definitely does. I think players... I think it's not by as much as in some other games, but I do think aggro... What Flesh and Blood does, though, I think, and we've spoken about this, and has done better, I think, in the past, say, 6 to 9 months, has given you reasons to play other aggro decks than just the best aggro deck, right? I know we've spoken about that a lot, in terms of you've been through formats before. It was like there was only one correct aggro deck to play because it did the most damage in the most efficient way, and it was maybe the most robust aggro deck. And then you go to World Championships in Osaka, you have Dash.io is kind of the premier aggro deck, but then you have Viserai, you have Zen, you have these different styles of aggro deck. And I think what the game has moved on to is more interesting aggro decks. They're a little bit slower, but they act in different ways. They attack on different axes. Some of them are more susceptible to certain lines of attack, others to other lines of attack, right? So the difference between, split damage on a Rune Blade versus go wide small damage on a Ninja versus maybe, more robust, sort of bigger attacks, something like arrows out of Azalea, right, that present these on-hit effects, or potentially assassins with disruptive, aggressive attacks like out of Slippy. And I think when I look at the meta, so even if we just look at the last 3 weeks of events, we go to US Nationals, Cindra and Azalea made up the second and third most played decks. I think you're seeing aggro decks be very popular but be split. And also Florian at that event, I think, was a split between, when you look at the deck list, between decks that were more on the slower side of mid-range and decks that are more on the aggressive side of mid-range. I think some people who had been playing maybe Aurora in the past flipped into Florian for that reason, still played their Channel Mount Heroics, their 6 go again attacks, or their 9 go again attacks, I guess, and tried to be aggressive. If you look at last weekend in Bologna, Azalea was tied equal the most played deck with Florian, Cindra 5th most played. I think people are splitting these aggressive decks, and even down to the point where when you look into some of these mid sort of tier of heroes, you see a lot of other decks that are aggressively slanted or leaning. You've got the Acelios, you've got the Fangs, you've got the Vinsets of the world, the Dash.ios. And then this past weekend as well, I think, obviously, I guess the results of Cindra, in my view, would kind of speak for itself in many ways.
I'm not entirely sure if it's fair to add all the aggro decks together and say, like, hey, it's higher than Florian, therefore people still...
I'm not saying that.
Therefore the statement still holds.
I'm not saying that.
then you should be adding up Florian and Verdance and all the other non-aggro decks as well. I don't know. I think we're far from the point where it's like, oh, aggro is clearly going to be most represented every time, and you have a whole bunch of other stuff to, like, think about and prepare for. I think people default... Like, it's no longer true that people just default to aggro. It's kind of like how I feel like the game is trending, which I think is great.
I don't know if people ever have, though. I just think it's been the most... I think the majority of people, or the biggest slice of the pie, because when you look at aggressive decks, mid-range decks, combo-based decks, attrition, life, control-based decks, I think there is these kind of 4 segments, or more 4 established-ish segments we've seen in Flesh and Blood. I think aggro's always tended to have the biggest slice of the pie, and I still don't think that's changed. It's just... I think what this is a symptom of right now is there is not a clear best aggro deck, and there is not clear good aggro decks, honestly, right now. It's all a little bit contextual, honestly. And I think, Cindra is obviously trying to make a case, but yeah, Cindra is powerful in some ways, but it's certainly not as powerful as consistently powerful as other aggro decks that have existed before, that's for sure.
All right, so actually with that, let's segue into talking about, I guess, these nationals results and I guess predictions for coming up as well. So Cindra had an amazing weekend, but you are pointing out, and I think rightly so, that she isn't an S tier aggro deck. She isn't like the likes of Aurora or even the likes of Viscerai. Viscerai was weird. It wasn't like fully an aggro deck. Like he had many angles that you attack differently.
For sure.
But he wasn't on like the Aurora level or like the Zen level back in his heyday as well, right? She's not on that level. So where's your mind at with where Cindra goes from here, like the following couple of weekends?
Yeah, I think Cindra is in the spot where it's now I think after this weekend, I think Azalea is the other part of the equation for me when it comes to Cindra. Azalea has really fallen off a cliff last week, and after 2 weeks of really tough results for Azalea, I don't think that's surprising. The meta is not particularly great for Azalea, I don't think, especially if we look at the decks. We said it was on the fringe last week, right? And we spoke about, Gravy, Verdance, Prism as those other three kind of decks hanging around, and I'm like, I don't want to be particularly playing Azalea into any of those personally, and then add Cindra into the mix, which is, it's an okay matchup but not fantastic. So I think Azalea has definitely fallen away. Cindra has taken a lot of that meta share as well. I think it's going to continue to be the premier or the go-to aggro deck for now, and I think because of how popular Gravy is showing to be, and how Verdance is probably one of the other decks that sit there at top of still being very good, I think Cindra is going to continue to be played quite highly.
So, actually, also on that note, let's talk about Verdance. Do you think she goes down with Gravy coming up? Because I'm not fully seeing the reason to play Verdance. Like, okay, I'm looking at, say Canada, for example. The top 4 represented heroes were Gravy, Cindra, Verdance, and Prism. Mm-hmm. As a Verdance, I don't want to be playing into any of the other 3 top 4 decks. I don't be playing into Cindra or Gravy or Prism. Like, out of those 3, I'll pick Cindra as, like, the one I want to play into the most, but I'm still not happy. I'm not, like, sitting down against Cindra and being like, I'm targeting you. And part of this is because Florian has finally gone down, right? At US Nats, he was most represented, even though we were kind of like, okay, Gravy's here. We're not entirely sure if you're allowed to play the game, Florian. Bologna, he was still high. And then now, this past weekend, we're finally seeing him drop.
Yep.
And so it's to the point where, is Verdance going to stay where she is, or is she going to drop as well? And then does that affect, I don't know, say Cindra?
Dude, what is so interesting about this format is I don't think I've ever been in a format before where I'm going to call for the 3rd week in a row a different best deck for this weekend. Like, I will do it. I will indicate the deck that I think is the best deck for this weekend, or the best deck in the meta for this coming weekend, and it is shifting every single week because that is a result of the actual meta that is representing, and that has got to be a massive W for LSS, because I think we've never been in this situation before. There's always just been a clear best deck, and I think you might have some disagreement, which we can talk about when we talk more about Gravy, in terms of just, is there a clear best deck in the format? But just to answer that question, there's something flying in my face. There's like a little fruit fly in my mic. I don't know what's going on. Anyway, we get distracted, Pankaj. It's sent by the Gravy. I'll tell you what, maybe Gravy sent it. When it comes to Verdance, I think, it's going to drop away, because its natural, what it's preying on naturally is falling away, right? It is the better of the 2 Earth decks in the Earth mirror, right? It is the significant superior in the Earth mirror. Florian is now dropping away. Verdance, I think, then loses a matchup that has been particularly great for it. I think Prism is steadily rising as an option, and I think people will actually go the way of Prism this coming weekend potentially as well. Cindra is, I think, what's your experience? I think the Cindra matchup for Verdance is okay, but not amazing. I think it's maybe slightly favored to Cindra.
It's close to 50-50 slash maybe slightly Cindra favored. It's like it's a game. Yeah, you will sit and play a game. I'm not like dooming if I'm on Verdance playing against Cindra. I'm like, okay, we have a game to be played. Whereas I am dooming if I play against like a Gravy or a Prism.
Exactly. And I think what Verdance has done really well in the previous weeks is taken advantage of the fact that there has not been a coalescence of what is good in the format. People have not agreed of what you should play. I think the metagame has been very split and spread, and that usually does happen at these nationals and callings level, is that the meta is flatter than it would be at something like a Pro Tour. But once you get into it's especially flat and more evenly spread early in the format, and then as it becomes clear what the best decks are, it starts to narrow down. So I think that is big strikes against Verdance. What I will say, though, quite interestingly, is that Verdant still had a very good weekend. If you look at Canadian Nationals, for instance, it had the third most played deck, and it put 2 into top 8, the same conversion rate as Gravy, a better conversion rate than Cindra, a better conversion rate than Prison. So quite interestingly, Verdant's actually had a pretty good weekend. It was 4 of the top 8 in Taiwan, which is crazy. Might tell you something about what they're doing out there in Taiwan. So I think Verdance is one of those decks. I think it's very powerful. I think it's not going to stray too far away from being one of the top decks. But whereas 2 weeks ago, heading to US Nationals, I thought it was the best deck heading into that weekend, I think it is now, for me, not the right time to be playing Verdance. But that could all change as the meta starts to adapt again, and Verdance could come back on the table. I honestly think Florian could come back onto the table by the time we get to PC Singapore as well. So who knows?
I feel like you left us hanging a little bit. You said you're gonna suggest a different best deck for this weekend, but you never mentioned what that best deck is.
We're not there yet.
Are you gonna? Oh, okay, cool. All right. I guess I'll take it from here then. I will point out. So I do agree with you that the meta is shifting a lot.
Yeah.
Where yes, there's a whole bunch of these top players, I guess, like when I say players, I mean heroes. Like top heroes are sort of shifting around. I will point out though, and you hinted at this part we're going to disagree on. There is one constant. Everything else is shifting around, but Gravy is staying there. Stuff is shifting around in context of Gravy Bones. Like you aren't saying, oh, okay, Cindra's rising, and then so yeah, you're saying Cindra's rising and Gravy's rising, and then like Florian's dipping, but no matter what these other shifts are, Gravy is still staying where he is as one of the de facto best decks, which to me makes it like we've spoken a lot about absolute power level in the past, where it's like, oh, maybe this isn't the best time to play Enigma because Aurora is so high. It doesn't matter. It's like they'll find a way to adapt for whatever the best aggro deck is and play. And yes, Gravy isn't Enigma. Yeah, sure, it's not exactly the same.
Definitely is not.
But yeah, it's not exactly the same. But I do think. I think we're still early in Gravy's life cycle. I do think by the time it comes to Singapore, my prediction is, and this is a few weeks out, not for this weekend, my prediction is Gravy is just best deck by the time we come to Singapore.
I think that could be the case, but I don't think it's because of the fact that I think people will, of course, refine their Gravy lists and find things. I'm pretty adamant that it's not Enigma. It is not at that power level. It's not at that flexibility that Enigma had. For instance, when you speak about the Aurora meta, I think the reason that Gravy is the constant, like you say, in this format, is because it's good. It's a board presence deck. It is also the new kid on the block that people are super interested in. It is putting up solid results, and it is. I think you pointed this out like a month ago, and I'll use your words. You said I think it's going to be format warping, and then I think we kind of agreed at the time that it would be format defining, whether that meant that it was going to be the best deck, or at least it would influence how the meta shook out. And I think we're starting to see that come into play, right? Like it is influencing a lot of what is happening in the metagame around it, even if I would contend right now it is not showing itself to be the best deck, but it is influencing what is happening around it in the metagame because it is so specific in the way that people have to potentially show up and attack it, and it is being most represented week on week.
So I will just say, yeah, Gravy isn't Enigma, but Cindra isn't Aurora either. So it's sort of
That's very true.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like he doesn't need to be Enigma's power level to be able to deal with the aggro deck of this format. And I think people will and already have been finding lists of Gravy that can actually like play into Cindra and have a matchup percentage into Cindra is very similar to like what Enigma had into Aurora, which is like what I mean when 60%. I keep saying. Which is what I mean when I keep saying like Gravy is the Enigma of this format. It's this format. Yeah, sure. If Gravy was around when Aurora existed, yeah, he's not played at all. But in this format where the best aggro deck is the likes of Cindra or Azalea or Slippy, he is the Enigma of this format, is kind of what I keep talking about. Should we move on and talk about some other heroes?
Yeah, I do just want to just wrap up my side on that because I don't agree. I don't think I know what you're saying. Like it's not a direct comparison, but it's comparable because both power levels are down. And I think while that is true, what I would say is now having spent some time playing with Gravy the last 2 weeks is that it is a lot more constricted in the way that it has to, I think, build than Enigma, which kind of feels weird because I thought that would not be the case because I was like, well, Enigma, you need these really specific things. You want to play these power cards. But Gravy, because of the small card pool that Pirate and Necromancer has, it's so reliant on it's very specific cards or on a few generics to derive power. And so I actually think there's a couple of different ways you can attack Gravy because you know that it can't build in certain ways, whereas Illusionists, for instance, have been able to do because of their card pool. And I think that is quite interesting. I think that opens up avenues to other heroes that maybe in the past couldn't, say, attack an Illusionist, for instance. And I think what's quite interesting, we can talk a bit more about Prism, is that I actually think Prism is in a very good spot. And I think people are going to also look at decks like Arachne Slip Through the Cracks. Kasai, I think, is also another deck that people are going to look at heavily this coming weekend. So, yeah, I 100% understand where you're coming from, and I see it to an extent. I just don't think it's quite to that extent. And I also think there's some really key differences that are going to play a big role in how this format shakes out. Mm-hmm. We will see within 4 weeks who's right, though.
Yes, we will see. Okay, you brought up some very interesting heroes there, which I do want to talk about.
Sure.
So you brought Prism. I think we mentioned Assassin, and you brought Kasai as well.
Yep.
So let's talk about these in order, I guess. Let's go Prism and then talk about Assassins and talk about Warriors.
Sure.
Because I think there's a lot to talk about those, and then I want to add one to that list. I want to add Jarl to that list. We kind of only touched on him a little bit last week, like towards the end, but I do want to expand on that first. So let's start with Prism. Mm-hmm. I think she had decent representation and won nationals as well this past weekend.
Yep.
In Czechia.
Yeah, Czechia.
Is that how you pronounce that?
Czechia. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Good matchup, Cindra. So far, I've heard, I think it started off Prism being very good into Gravy, and then I think as the Gravies get more practiced, it's becoming more and more of a game, but it's definitely a game to be played. It's not a blowout on either side. But obviously very good into Cindra, very good into Prism, very good into Verdance.
Yeah.
Do you think that sort of meta power level stays for Prism?
Yeah, I do. I think Prism can also adapt back to Gravy. I think Prism actually has some really interesting cards that it can play into Gravy, and particularly the strategies that Gravy might want to enact into Prism as well. I probably won't go too much more into that this week because but maybe in the future we can dive more into that. I'm still testing. I'm still trying to learn myself.
I'm super interested to hear that actually when you talk about a different avenue, because the first thing that comes to mind if you talk about different avenue, I'm thinking Spectra. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, Gravy does have action points. Because of back alley break line and things like that. So I'm like, ooh.
I don't think it's Spectra. I don't think it's Spectra. I think it's
exactly. Because we looked into that as well and we're like, okay.
Yeah, I think it's different attack actions and But I think Prism's always challenged by a 32 life, right? Like that's always going to be a challenge for Prism, and I think that's actually something that Gravy can definitely take advantage of with some of the cards. Gravy can be aggressive for sure. So
he also has big boats. He just has big boats, so it's which can kind of... It could just put Prism in a spot where they need to just send a Herald and be like, hope you don't have the popper, or dedicate stuff like the arms piece to remove Phantasm and things like that.
Yeah, that's definitely very true. I think Prism had an okay weekend. It was the fourth most. If we just go down some of these nationals, it was the fourth most represented in Canada. Didn't put any into top 8. Also, be reminded, when we talk nationals, there's also draft involved in these nationals, right? If we go down to Germany, again, it was the fourth most represented with the exact same top 4 representation in Germany as we saw in. So just talking to two of the biggest nationals of the weekend, Canada and Germany had the exact same representation of the top 4 heroes in Gravy, Cindra, Verdance, and Prism. Interestingly, Acilio was the fifth most represented in Germany. When you look at top 8, no Acilios in top 8, but there was, and also no Prisms in top 8, interestingly, but there was definitely a Gravy, a couple of Verdance, which is again why I sort of cite Verdance having a pretty solid weekend. Taiwan, another big nationals this past weekend, 4 Verdance in top 8, 1 Prism. No Gravy there. So I think Prism had an okay weekend. It had, honestly, when I look at it, Prism had a worse weekend than Gravy because it didn't put as many decks into top 8. But in my view, not super far behind. If I ranked it just looking down the results this past weekend across the nationals and the top 8s, representation, conversion from what we can see so far, my ranking for this weekend would have been Cindra came out on top, Verdance was second, Gravy was third. I would say Prism or Slippy were fourth. It's pretty close actually, and then probably Marionette or Azalea behind those two.
Mm-hmm. Also, I did just add Acilio to the list because you mentioned it. I was like, oh my god, yes, we have to talk about Acilio as well because I do think there's a lot going on in that deck as well.
Can I say that while we're talking about Prism, I think Prism is one of the best picks for the coming weekend though. This is what I was alluding to. I think Prism might be the best pick for this weekend because I think I think whether you think that Gravy Bones has been able to work out and adapt, the thing is Gravy Bones has the big target on its back, right? Cindra does after this weekend as well. But I think Gravy Bones has to work out a lot of things and has to prepare for still a reasonably... Like, it can't even take for granted that its matchup versus Verdance is, like, fantastic. Because if you're just like, well, I'm just not going to play Arcane Barrier, and you see these decks put Millennium Tree and things back in, and they go that route, like, all of a sudden, that matchup might actually not be good, right? So, I'm not going to say it's fantastic for Verdance, but you could be taking things for granted because of how early on we are in the format, testing, all these kind of preconceived ideas. So, I think you've got to be careful, and I think Prism for this weekend will still have a good matchup into Gravy, in my view, for this coming weekend at least. I think this new matchup's actually pretty close. I think it can come down to things like dice roll, as I know what I was seeing watching some of the guys test. I think it's probably Prism favored slightly, though. I think that's a matchup you're probably happy to have, and I think you can tick for it a little bit. The Verdance matchup is good for Prism. So I think Prism's in a good spot for this coming weekend.
I think I could... Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with that. I do think Prism's in a good spot. It's one of those cases where we might just see the... Like, what's it called? Like a Ferris wheel, in a sense?
Yeah.
Where it's like, okay, like, the Cindra's at the top now, and it's going to be Prism next, and people adapt to Prism and bring out Jarl or something.
I think so.
Although, on that note, I mean... I don't want to jump forward to Jarl, but, I mean, if we talk about top decks being like... Okay, yeah, that's fine. Let's jump up to Jarl, then. I think if we talk about like Prism and Cindra, you're expecting a bunch of Prism and Cindra this weekend. I think Jarl turns out to be if Verdance goes down as well, which is something we can maybe expect with them not really having a deck to prey on anymore because Florian is so low. I do wonder whether Jarl can actually show up now. Remember, he can play his blue big attacks now, which... If you play a bunch of poppers into Prism, since they lost Tome, they actually just don't have a loop strategy anymore. Like, they kind of just can't deal with Guardians that have infinite poppers in the deck. So you can play those. You have the strategy of blowing up Gravy's Compass. I don't think you auto-win even when you blow up the Compass.
No.
There's a game to be played, but you're not like a Guardian into board state that in the past where it's like you might as well go eat lunch. You have a game to play there. And then you kind of feast on Cindra and feast on Prism. So I do wonder whether, with the downturn of Earth, with Verdance and Florian going down, I do wonder whether Jarl can show up and do something.
It sounds like you've answered...
Oh, and also, of course, New Leaving. Like, New Leaving and downplay of Earth. It kind of like, can Jarl do stuff?
I think it's time to ask the question. I think I've already answered it myself, but it sounds like you've answered my question a little bit, because my question was going to be, why play Jarl over Florian, for instance, if you want to have a good matchup into Cindra and Prism. But
Gravy is... I think you're better into Gravy as Jarl.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure that's true. I think it's both pretty bad. I'm not sure it's much different, honestly. Personally. Okay. From what I've seen. It might be, and it sounds like you... That's what I'm saying. You kind of answered my question. I think you seem to think that maybe Jarl was a better time into Gravy. I still think it's a pretty poor matchup. But maybe it is slightly better. What I would say though is, I guess, the Verdance matchup is, it's not good for either Jarl or Florian. Assassins might be...
I do wonder whether the Verdance matchup for Jarl got better now that they can actually run Rousers and Zealouses. Because we haven't actually seen that matchup with that configuration of Jarl. We've only seen a configuration of Jarl where they had to play into new, and so they played a whole bunch of blues that they can't attack with. And I do wonder whether that can help.
You still have to play some of those cards though, because you need them for your deck to function. You still need to cast Oakenhold. It's your most powerful card. Like, you still do need some of these Earth and Ice cards. So, like, having I played a lot of Jarl in the lead up to PT London. Have revisited it since. It's still a little bit awkward. I think what LSS is doing a really good job of is with these heroes, they're building constraints into the deck building that it's really hard to get around. It's definitely not Ultim, that's for sure. And
that's fair.
Yeah, I think right now, if I was going to think about playing Jarl, I'd have a really hard time not just playing Florian over it, I think.
I could see that. I will also point out, I think there might be jumping the Ferris wheel a little bit. We need Prism to actually have her place up there, and then maybe Jarl. So Jarl would be like you're sort of like predicting and maybe going a little far ahead.
I think so.
Whereas maybe this weekend is actually just Prism's time.
I think if we learned anything at Tier 3 events, it is don't play the level... So if level 0 is the meta, or the best deck in the format, level 1 is people responding to the meta. Don't play level 2, which is people responding to the deck that's responding to the deck. Like, you just get punished every single time almost every single time for doing it at these more open events.
Exactly.
The meta does not move as quick as you think it does.
Yeah, just play the deck that's beating what everyone knows is the deck to beat. You just play that one. So like in Zen meta, it was go play an assassin, go play Nuo Azuri.
Yeah.
And then like now it's like go play the thing that beats Cindra and Gravy. The other stuff it's not going to move that quick. That you need to beat the thing that beats Cindra and Gravy.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, you look back at Worlds as well. It's like Dash.io is like the big bet. I mean, it ended up, actually, I'm not use an example because it ended up not coming to fruition. Weirdly, that Dash.io was the big bad. But yeah.
She was, right? I mean, there was definitely. I mean, Sam Sutherland was top 8 on Dash.io. There was that another one.
It just ended up being.
It was only Sam.
I think it was 2, but it just ended up being split between Dash.io, Aurora, and Viserai in the end, which was quite interesting.
And Enigma, obviously, who won the whole thing.
Well, what I'm saying is the level 2 was CYB Enigma. In my view, I think right. That was the answer to Dash.io. But yeah. Okay.
I see.
Let's talk about assassins. I think when I talk about assassins, to me, it's just Arachne slip through the cracks. Personally, I am really struggling to understand Marionette in this meta. I don't think it looks very good for you. I don't think Gravy is a good matchup for you. I don't think Cindra is a particularly good matchup for you. I definitely don't think Verdance is a good matchup for you. I don't think Prism's a good matchup for you. So I'm really struggling on why you play Marionette in this format. On the other hand, I think Slippy has angles to this format, including Gravy and Cindra. So that's my view. And actually, Prism's not that bad a matchup for you.
I agree with you on that. I think Marionette
finally we agree on
goes
something.
down, but well, particularly because if you're trying to clear Gravy's allies, like all the mark mechanics deal with hero, like attacking a marked hero, marking a hero. You can't. Your deck is basically turned off if you're trying to clear allies, and it's. I think on the surface, Gravy seems like a sort of deck where once you put him in the blender, it's hard for him to get out. Except that's not really the case. He actually does have many strong small hand.
Definitely.
Turns. Like, he has a lot of hands where it's like, it's like 1 to 2 cards and he still puts a threat on the board that is difficult for you to deal with, especially as an assassin sometimes, without like innate go again. Because remember, the Marionette hero ability as well, you only get go again if it hits a marked hero, so you won't get go again off hitting off allies. So yeah, I don't think it's great there. I do think you are fine into Cindra, though. I would say Cindra is, like, I'd rather be in the Marionette side into Cindra than on the Cindra side. So that part is fine, but then yes, the prism and everything is not great. But Slippy into both Cindra and Gravy does seem like an angle. It reminds me of the people. I mean, like Michael Hamilton brought Slippy to PT London to try and beat up on both Enigma and Aurora, right? Yeah, exactly. So it sounds like it could be very well in that region as well.
Yeah,
it's basically the same angle. Like your Slippy beats the board state deck and beats the aggro deck that's beating the board state deck.
Yeah, it's a similar angle to Prism in some ways, right? Like Earth is dropping away. So although Prism has a good Verdance matchup, Slippy doesn't, and that's why I think for me Prism this weekend at least takes the slight edge on those two decks. If you're looking for, and bear in mind, I'm not saying that Gravy and Cindra aren't good decks again for this weekend. I'm just saying if we're thinking about how the meta shifts this weekend, those are the two decks I think are probably the biggest winners heading into this weekend. Maybe if we want to talk about it and get onto it, Kasai I think might be the other.
Yeah, let's move on and talk about Warrior. So there's Kasai, and I think it's probably worth just mentioning Dawnblade Dory as well, as a potential. But yeah, let's start with Kasai. We had some strong players this past weekend. Take Kasai, like Aaron Shines, for example, made top 8 of Canadian Nats. On Kasai, obviously they're 2 feast on the Gravies. I do think the aggro matchup, like the Cindra matchup, it's a game. I wouldn't say you're like super favored on the Kasai side. You have one thing going for you is that Cindra can't block you like ever. Because she's blocking with attacks and you have like double saber and it's just you're gonna get all your gold and your copper, but you do fall in the thing of you need to see your spoils of war relatively early and then you need to see your blood on the hands also like shortly after that. Like you sort of need to see them early and need to see in the right order. You need to see them in the right order as well. But yeah, it's like it's a fine game to be played. You don't have too much of a problem like blocking out the mask. And still refreshing your dynamos and doing stuff. So it's a game to be played. Earth is going down. Prism is also a game to be played. So yeah, I do think Kasai is in a strong spot. But I'm going to bring up, so I'm going to echo what you mentioned when you talk about Slippy, where it's like, why not just play Prism if it's trying to attack the same angle?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it probably comes down to, so you spoke about Cindra. I think it comes down to that matchup. Which hero you think has the better Cindra matchup, I think. And I think a lot of people who chose to play Kasai think it's Kasai. So I think the other interesting thing about Kasai is it had a very it didn't win any nationals this past weekend, but it had a really good weekend from a conversion standpoint when you look at these larger nationals. And so 4 copies registered in Canada, for instance. Aaron Shantz makes top 8 with the hero. You look at Germany, I think it was 3 represented, 3 registered. 1 makes top 8 there as well. So it had a pretty good weekend from a conversion standpoint, certainly. But I think that's the question that comes down to is you look across the spread. What is you're looking at its margins, its edges, right? It's a case of, okay, when I look at the top 3 decks, what I think my edges or margins are there. I would say Prism, while Kasai might have a better Cindra matchup, maybe a slightly better Gravy matchup than Prism. Prism has much better Verdance matchup, I would say, certainly. And then I think what you start to look at is, okay, representation of Arachnes, of Azaleas, maybe even Florians as a consideration of where you go next into which hero you play.
Mm-hmm. I will also point out, I don't think Kasai's Gravy matchup is like as good as like Cindra's Gravy matchup, for example. I think it's especially as the Gravies start to practice that matchup a little bit more. I have been seeing game plans come out where it does make things quite difficult for the Kasai, or like not as like smooth as like like the first couple of weeks of Gravy, where they're kind of just trying to do the normal thing in the Kasai and realizing she's just farming your allies. So it's like I do think you're favored. But you're not like super turbo favored. And then your Cindra matchup is still very much a game. So I'm not as high on Kasai, but I could totally be missing something. I will say though, what you have going for you is you just beat up any assassin. Like if an assassin tries to show up to play, you're just winning that. Like you do have a buy on that front.
Yeah, and Marionette continues to be fairly well represented, and Slippy seems like it's on the rise, so that could be a good reason to register it, depending on what you expect your metagame to be this coming weekend and next. It's so interesting hearing you talk about Gravy and be like, this deck adapts. Gravy adapts to this. Gravy adapts to this. I'm like, you sound like me with Enigma in the lead up to Pro Tour London, where I was like, no, this like you just adapt. Oh, you do this then, or in Worlds. No, you just do this. It's quite funny.
I'm telling you, it's gonna happen.
We'll see.
I see it. I see it coming. I think by Singapore they would have adapted, and then. Yeah. Domblade Dory, real quick. It's weird. It feels like Domblade Dory is kind of similar to Kasai, but more polarized. Like, I think you have a better Gravy matchup than Kasai does. You have a better Cindra matchup than Kasai does, but you have a worse Prism matchup than Kasai does.
Yep, definitely.
So it's sort of like you're just... Yeah, because, I don't know, it's like they settled like one angel, and then now you're... I think I'd rather be on Kasai than Domblade Dory into Prism personally.
I don't have an opinion at this point.
I could be missing something. It just seems like I don't like the one like one angel hits the board and you're on Dawnblade is just it's so rough. It's you just won't get your on hit.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was say which deck wears Jagged Edge better, I guess, is the question.
Oh yeah, I suppose I could put that card in. And maybe it is necessary, and maybe that's a Prism tech, I suppose. I don't know. So I think Dumbledore is like worth like mentioning. I think your Assassin matchup isn't as good as Kasai's. But I think you beat up on Gravy and Cindra a little bit harder than Kasai does. So
yeah, I agree.
Could be something if you're into maybe gem rolling a little bit.
Can I just say one thing though, when it comes to the Gravy conversation? Because we're talking about, I don't remember when Enigma was, and I'm not saying Gravy's there, right? Because we know Gravy's, there's still a lot to figure out. People are still working out the list and stuff. But there was no point in time where we were like, oh yeah, this deck could just like do this different plan and maybe be viable. Like, or like you beat up hard, but you're playing Gem Roulette. Like there just wasn't these options that we see with Gravy. And I think regardless of where Gravy ends up landing, what I love right now is that there is a lot of different options to potentially play in this format over the next couple of weeks. This format seems to continue to evolve, and I'm really enjoying, even though, you know, not playing nationals, being an outsider, testing, getting ready for PT, Singapore, trying to preempt where we might land on that Ferris wheel that you talk about in terms of these heroes that might have the best angle of attack when we come 3 weeks down the line to get to PT Singapore. And, you know, I definitely didn't feel that way about, for instance, Worlds in Osaka. I definitely didn't feel that way about PT London, albeit a much more established meta for those two events at this point.
Yeah, it is. It's one of those cases where I don't know, like a new set dropped, but it's like the heroes are very deep. It wasn't like when MST came out and everyone's like, okay, yeah, we just should be on Zen. Like clearly, this is like the best thing to do. So it's like so a new set dropped with a whole bunch of deep heroes and Gravy and a strong hero as well. It wasn't like, I don't know, like when Dromai dropped, it took like forever for her to actually be good. Remember, she kept showing up. She kept having like second most represented like every freaking event and not top 8ing a single time.
That's a classic illusionist thing though. That happens every time.
Exactly. So I do feel like we're at like that stage of it a little bit.
The mid also sucked
it does
Roma as well, to be fair.
Yeah, but it also feels like the rest of the field is way more even now. Like I don't think you can really say like out of like in these like top like 10 heroes that we've been talking about, you can't really say one is strictly more powerful than the others. Like maybe Verdance is like a little bit on like the higher end, but still very much within the same band of power. It's not like the egregiousness of like that Zen was or like the Aurora was. So yeah, I'm with you. It's a huge W for the game that we are in that spot.
I actually think there's only 3 decks that feel really powerful to me, and they're not even the top 3 decks. It's just because their power level is not that much higher that the metagame doesn't mean that they get pulled down. So for instance, I think the 2 Earth heroes, Florian, Verdance, and then Gravy, to me, seem like the 3 most inherently powerful heroes in the game right now. But because of the way the meta is, and because of how powerful they are, which is not massively more powerful than the next band of heroes, it just plays really nicely, I think. There's just not this big gap between the power levels of heroes like we've had in previous iterations of Flesh and Blood, different formats. And it's really nice, to be honest.
Agreed with that. I just realized we brought up Jarl, and I was looking through just the graphics, and I was like, oh, do we need to talk about Victor? Because I do wonder whether, well, just kind of everything I said about Jarl, where it's like you're good into Cindra, and you beat a Prism as well. Like, it does apply to Victor as well, maybe even harder, so because he definitely does run the big blues, and can just beat a Prism with it, and you do beat up Cindra. Mm-hmm. I think he doesn't have the blow-up compass against Gravy, but
he does.
I mean, Cast Homes...
Better to
with the... Better to pulp. Is that legal yet?
Yeah, it's legal.
Oh, it's legal. Oh, okay. Oh, he does. Okay, so I guess he does have that. My bad then.
It's not as easy to do, though.
I think
it's not as...
not as easy. And he does have... He plays the Rousers and Zealouses much better. Like, to your point, Jarl still needing to run...
Better.
Yeah. You said Jarl needs to run those multi-elemental stuff, like Victor doesn't. And Cast Homes... Like, I've been seeing people play that again, because Victor's come back in a little bit since Nu's gone, and he's entered the testing process a little bit, and that card is just dirty, especially with the new Fable. Cast Homes. Visit the Goldmane Estate.
Oh my
People call it Cast Homes.
That's a terrible name.
Wait, this is your first time hearing the term
that's a
Cast
rubbish
Homes?
name.
Okay, everyone in the comments, you have to roast Hayden for hearing Cast Homes for the first time here in freaking June
I'm mad
2025.
that I've had to hear it, to be honest.
I can't believe you hadn't heard it at this point. Everyone calls it Cast Homes. It took me a moment to remember what the actual name was when you asked me, because I was like, I've just known it as Cast Homes. Regardless, that card is very, very strong.
Yes,
and it's back into the metagame. And he got the Fable too, which is a big upgrade too. Like, that Fable in Victor is kind of scary. So, what are your thoughts on Victor? Do you think he can come out to play it with Earth going down?
Potentially. I think Victor is better than Jarl, personally. Because I think you're just better against random stuff, to be honest. I think you actually are better into Verdance, honestly. I think you're better into the Earth Heroes in general, because you actually get to play it. You just get to play like this good aggro kind of... all your cards synergize a lot better. And if you draw well, you can win games, I think. I think you absolutely destroy the Assassins, whereas I think there is some plans they can have into Jarl that's more interesting. So I think Victor is a better option, personally.
I think you're better into the Warriors as well.
Oh, yeah,
definitely. I think, like, Kasai into Victor used to be Kasai favorite until Cast Homes got printed, and then suddenly it's like, wait, like, it's like now the damage output can be very high, and if they draw smoothly, it's like... But I think it's more like a 50-50, maybe even slightly Victor favorite now.
I'm banning this nickname for Goldmane Estate. There's just Goldmane Estate right there. Just call it Goldmane Estate.
But Cast Homes is so many fewer syllables.
I mean, it's not.
It is. Cast Homes is 2 syllables. Goldmane Estate is 3 syllables.
Just Goldmane, it's fine.
Oh, I'm gonna play Goldmane? Like, that's a Victor
Pitch,
Goldmane.
Pitch, estate, draw a card. Create a bunch of might tokens. The might stacking is actually pretty insane with Visit the Goldmane Estate as well. I think people should, if you're looking at Victor, you should look at some of the setups you can do, which are pretty insane with building up like 7 might tokens.
I'm not just letting that slide. I do think the community has agreed that Cast Homes
I've never heard it.
So
never heard it
I'm pretty sure you're getting outvoted here, but we'll see. The comments will speak.
I'm feeling confident on this one.
Okay, so Victor...
I'm feeling confident the comments are going to back me on this one. Don't let me down. Don't let me down, YouTube comments.
All right, so Victor, real, Potentially. Acilio. Can we talk about Acilio at all?
Yeah.
This might just be that this might be just because I hang around Peter and Margin a whole bunch that maybe I'm getting the communal brain rot from them about Acilio. But I've seen some scary things come out from this deck, especially with the I forget the zero cost shock. I forget the actual name of the card.
I don't know.
But Consign to Cosmos, that one. It is scary. Let's see, like if you're talking about like in the context of Gravy, Cindra, Prism, I don't think you super want to play against a Prism. Like it is interesting where you do have the sort of Icelander like play now, especially with a zero cost shock, where they attack on an Angel, you can blow it up if they're not ready for it. Which is cool. You have a little more reach with that too. Like it's more often that if you get like 3 against an Acilio, you actually can just die because they just play the shock and amp it. And then into Cindra it's an aggro race, and into Gravy, I think you can be fast enough where you kind of just put him underwater before he can do much.
Yeah, I think Acilio is at least interesting. Acilio reminds me of these decks in the past where it reminds me of a little bit of like Levia a while ago, where it's like, oh, this hero can have good matchups. If things go your way, you will win this game. Like that is kind of how Acilio reminds me of. Like it does have power and it does have really good draws, but it also has some absolutely trash draws, and it does just lose to itself sometimes. And I think that is very real with Acilio. So I think Acilio inherently has some really interesting power. I think it can absolutely blow you out in games, and it feels disgusting when it does that. And then other times you feel like you're playing a game against a draft hero. So I think, if you know Acilio inside and out and you want to take the punt on it, I think it's like a reasonable punt given the fact that you play draft also, right? If you're feeling really confident draft, you want to take your Acilio hero, but don't begrudge anyone for doing it. I will personally definitely not be doing that. I don't think I just don't think there's anywhere else to go with Acilio. It seems like it's not like something's gonna, like someone comes up with finds a card that hasn't been tested in Acilio and unlocks Acilio, and all of a sudden it's this more consistent aggro lightning deck. Like I just don't think that's going to happen. So and also once you've played against it a couple of times, you realize how much of a glass cannon that deck is, I think, and how to target it. It starts to feel really bad on the Acilio side. So yeah, hero is reasonable. It obviously was the 5th most played deck at Germany Nationals, which is quite interesting. Didn't convert to a top 8, unfortunately, for those players. But yeah, I think it's probably somewhere in a tier 3 spike consideration alongside something like Vincent, maybe. I don't know.
The Levia comparison is actually so true now that you brought that up. Like it's like the exact words. Like when it does the thing, you're like, wait, how is this legal? And then you play these games where you're like, wait, did you just like die to yourself? And you brought up the glass cannon. It does feel like you kind of sneeze at Acilio and then he just like crumbles.
Yeah,
it's just like, oh no, I can't take this. You played like one CNC and he's just like looking at his hand and it's like, oh, okay, this is my life now.
Yeah, or a boat.
Yeah.
I think Levia even has that problem less than it used to as well. So I think I'm gonna be hard pressed to, but I get it because it does do the lightning aggro thing, and I think that is appealing to a player base. So I think we're going to continue to see it be played in some way, shape, or form. It obviously nearly made top 8 at US Nationals in the hands of Alex War. So yeah, I'm not saying I'm not writing off completely. I'm not saying no one should play that hero. I would say. About Vincent, for instance.
And you also wouldn't say that about Marlin, for sure.
Sure, we can go with that. Yeah, no, I think Marlin, Betsy, Puffin, Olympia. These heroes are all heroes that you could play. I can't believe
you put Marlin in Betsy tier. That is straight up offensive.
Yeah, it's a bit offensive. It's not that bad, but anyway. Poor Marlin. Anything else you want to add on before we wrap up the pod, Pankaj, about this format? I think what I would like to conclude with from my side is that I think this weekend the format is Gravy, Cindra, Prism, Verdance again, like we saw last weekend. I think Verdance will probably stay around the same because it did have very good results, and I do think it plays still quite well in the format, but I don't think it will perform as well this weekend, even though I think the representation will still be sort of in that 3rd to 4th, 5th most played deck at most nationals. I think Prism will rise up, whether that's a little bit in representation, but also in results this coming weekend. I think Cindra and Gravy across the board will continue to probably be the most represented. I'm interested to see if Gravy can start to convert more And I'm interested to see how people respond to Cindra and if it will have as good a time. I don't think it will. I think Cindra wins will drop off. I think Gravy could pick up a couple of wins this weekend. I think Prism could easily pick up a couple of wins this weekend. I think, winners probably for me are probably going to be Prism and maybe Gravy, maybe Slippy. I think losers will be probably Cindra and Verdance, just because I think they can't go much higher, honestly. But I could be wrong about that with Cindra. We'll see. And I think the other heroes on my watch list are definitely, Kasai, Slippy, and actually Florian, depending on the meta, starts to become back on my watch list as well, interestingly, just because I think if Verdance drops away, Prism rises, having a good matchup into Prism, Cindra, and the Assassins, if Slippy rises as well, could be a really good place to be. And let's not forget Azalea is still hanging around, very certainly.
My take for this coming weekend and upcoming weekends isn't quite as long. I just think Gravy's wins are just going to keep going up. I think his representation he's going to be more tuned, he's going to be more prepared, and he's just going to start racking up more wins in the lead up to Singapore. My watch list, so you did cover the big points about Cindras and Prisms. My watch list is going to be Victor. I am curious where he lands. I think again, like New leaving is I'm not sure if we've quite fully felt the repercussions of New leaving yet. Like the Verdant still being up there is relevant for that. I think she's allowed to still be up there because New has gone. But I'm curious whether the Victors can come onto play a little bit and see whether they can actually go ahead and have a game into Gravy. Because if they can, the rest of the top spread, at least, with like Cindras and Prisms and stuff, I think looks pretty good for him. Because Florian has finally fallen down.
Yep, makes sense. Cool. Well, that is episode 219 of Arsenal Pass. The national season is well and truly underway. Very interested to see where we go this coming weekend. Lots to keep an eye out for. UK Nationals this coming weekend. Singapore Nationals this coming weekend. New Zealand Nationals. Many, many more to be played. French Nationals this weekend. So those ones you can tune into and watch out for, do so. Check out fabtcg.com. The Nationals Championship link there on the homepage has all the stream links that you can go check them out. But from us, until next time, we'll see you in the next episode.